It's time for the news.
In today's top stories, the Minister of Foreign Affairs Ahmed Attaf has stressed the need to preserve and respect the independence of the decision of the Palestinians, calling for supporting the ceasefire and the reconstruction of Gaza. Algeria has expressed concern at the worsening humanitarian situation in Palestine and the violations of the human rights and international humanitarian law in occupied Western Sahara. Several international and Sahrawi human rights organizations have called for stepping up efforts to guarantee the Sahrawi people's right to self-determination. Hello and welcome on Radio Algeria International. I'm Jamal Osmani. The Minister of State in charge of Foreign Affairs, National Community Abroad and African Affairs, Mr. Ahmed Attaf, has stressed in Cairo the need to preserve and respect the independence of the Palestinian decision, calling for the mobilization around the Palestinian people in order to support the consolidation of the ceasefire and the launch of reconstruction efforts in the Gaza Strip after more than 15 months of Israeli aggression. In his address to the Arab League summit, Mr. Attaf reaffirmed Algeria's support for Palestine in consolidating the ceasefire and rebuilding Gaza, stressing the need to preserve and respect the independence of the Palestinian decision and ensure post-aggression measures to strengthen the path to a sovereign Palestinian state.
Algeria emphasizes the necessity of upholding and respecting the Palestinian decision, especially in light of the recent evident attempts to marginalize the Palestinian voice and diminish its role in the post-aggression arrangement on Gaza. These arrangements must solidify the foundation of our cause, not weaken them. They must clarify the path, not obscure it, paving the way for the establishment of an independent and sovereign Palestinian state. Today, we are called upon to rally around our Palestinian brothers as they need our support to uphold the ceasefire, to launch reconstruction efforts, and to reignite the drive toward a permanent, just and final solution through the establishment of the Palestinian state, an independent, sovereign Palestinian state with Al-Quds Sharif as its capital.
These, Mr. Attaf continued, are priorities that require the contribution of everyone, each from his or her position and according to his or her capacities and conditions. Algeria will be a key player in this process and will continue to fulfill its Arab mandate within the UN Security Council. He reaffirmed Algeria's support for Palestine, rejecting efforts to sideline its voice, isolate Gaza, or annex the West Bank, stressing the need to strengthen the path to a sovereign Palestinian state.
From this perspective, Algeria joins its voice with that of its Arab brothers to firmly reject any plans to displace Palestinians from their land, to denounce the desperate attempts to isolate Gaza from the rest of the Palestinian territories, and to condemn all persistent maneuvers aimed at annexing the West Bank and tearing it away from its authentic Palestinian identity.
Mr. Attaf continued, warning that today's danger lies in the erasure of the Palestinian people and the obstruction of their state's rightful place in history and global order.
Today, the danger lies in the dispersal of a people after an attempt to exterminate them. The danger lies in the displacement of a people after the confiscation of their land. The danger lies in aborting a national project by stripping it of its bearers. In one powerful statement, the danger today is in the erasure of a people from history, the Palestinian people, and the prevention of a state from entering the contemporary geopolitical sphere, the Palestinian state.
Shortly before the opening of the summit, a meeting bringing together Mr. Attaf and his counterparts from Tunisia and Libya has been held. It was an opportunity to assess the progress made in implementing the results of the tripartite summit held in April 2024 in Tunis. The three ministers also discussed the upcoming summit to be held in Tripoli, Libya. Meanwhile, Mr. Attaf met with his Mauritanian counterpart, in which they discussed bilateral relations and cooperation, as well as political issues of common concern at regional and international levels. The other participants in the extraordinary session of the Council of the Arab League at summit level, which kicked off yesterday in Cairo and was devoted to the situation in Palestine, have expressed their rejection of the plan to displace the Palestinians from the Gaza Strip, underlining that the reconstruction of the enclave after more than 15 months of Israeli aggression should take place with the presence of the Palestinians on their land. Asabika has the details.
The president of the state of Palestine, Mahmoud Abbas, said in his speech that Arab countries are meeting to confront these serious challenges that threaten the Palestinian cause, foremost among which are the calls for the displacement of Palestinian people from their homeland, which Palestinians categorically reject, as well as the practices of the occupation aimed at imposing a colonial reality in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem with the aim of undermining the two-state solution and liquidating the Palestinian cause. King Abdullah of Jordan, for his part, affirmed his country's total rejection of the displacement of the population of Gaza and underlined his support for a clear plan for the reconstruction of the enclave, accompanied by a timetable which will be presented to active partners in order to obtain the support of the international community. For his part, the King of Bahrain, Hamad bin Isa Al Khalifa, expressed his country's rejection of any attempt to displace Palestinians from their land and the expansion of settlements in the occupied territories. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi said that his plan for the reconstruction of Gaza would guarantee that the inhabitants of the Palestinian territory would remain on their land. The Secretary General of the Arab League, Ahmed Abul Ghaith, stressed in his speech that the summit is aimed at not committing another crime against the Palestinian people. He addressed the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, stressing that Gaza could only be rebuilt if its inhabitants remain on their land. Finally, the chairman of the European Council, Antonio Costa, expressed the European Union's rejection of any attempt to change the demographic nature of Gaza and called for support for the ceasefire and reconstruction efforts in the enclave.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has reaffirmed that the Palestinian people must have the right to define their own future and to live on their land in complete freedom. Speaking at the Extraordinary Summit or Arab League Summit, Antonio Guterres reiterated the need for irreversible steps towards achieving the two-state solution.
Serious negotiations for the ceasefire in all its facets must be resumed without delay. All hostages must be released immediately and conditionally in a dignified manner. The release of Palestinian detainees must be carried out per the terms of the deal and also in a dignified way. The parties must ensure humane treatment for all those held under their power, and all obstacles to the effective delivery of life-saving aid must be removed. Member States use all the leverage they have to support these. I welcome and strongly endorse the Arab-led initiative to mobilize support for Gaza's reconstruction clearly expressed in this summit, and the UN stands ready to fully cooperate in this endeavour.
Antonio Guterres has repeatedly called on the international community to work resolutely to make the two-state solution in the Middle East feasible and also reaffirmed the UN's rejection of any plan to displace the Palestinians from their land. Algeria has expressed its concern at the worsening humanitarian situation in the occupied Palestinian territories, despite the international mediation efforts that led to a ceasefire agreement in the Gaza Strip and at the systematic violations of human rights and international humanitarian law in occupied Western Sahara. Masoud Sharfi has the details.
In his intervention during the general debate on the second item on the agenda concerning the report of the High Commissioner for Human Rights within the framework of the 58th session of the Human Rights Council, HRC, the ambassador and permanent representative of Algeria to the United Nations office in Geneva and to the international organization in Switzerland, Rachid Beledhan, said that the report of the High Commissioner for Human Rights would be presented at the 58th session of the HRC. Rachid Beledhan stressed that the current session is being held at a time when the world is facing multiple challenges, accompanied by humanitarian tragedies, resulting notably from the proliferation of armed conflicts and long-term occupation, as is the case in the occupied Palestinian territories and Western Sahara.
Algeria expresses its concern at the persistent worsening of the humanitarian situation in the occupied Palestinian territories following the genocide perpetrated by the Zionist occupation since October 2023, the repercussions of which are still being felt despite the international mediation efforts that led to a ceasefire agreement.
Reaffirming the Algerian delegation's deep concern at the systematic violations of human rights and international humanitarian law in the territory of occupied Western Sahara, he called for these violations to be documented, urging the High Commissioner to send a fact-finding mission to the region and to submit a detailed report to the Council on the subject. He went on to say that Algeria believes in multilateral action, which it supports at the level of all international and regional bodies, including those active in the field of human rights.
In the Western Sahara file, international and Sahrawi human rights organizations have called in a report on violations documented in occupied Western Sahara in 2024 for stepping up efforts to guarantee the exercise of the right to self-determination by the Sahrawi people, underlining that the denial of this right is the root cause of all human rights violations in this non-autonomous territory. The report, which will be presented on the 6th of March at a press conference at the Palace of the Nations in Geneva, and of which APS has obtained a copy, gives a detailed account of Morocco's human rights violations in occupied Western Sahara. Saeed Bougazi has the details.
The report sheds light on the violation of the right to life, arbitrary detention, torture, and degrading treatment, the plundering of Sahrawi natural resources, the violation of economic, social, and cultural rights, enforced disappearances, and violations of the right to demonstrate and freedom of expression and association in occupied Western Sahara. The authors stated that in the absence of an independent and credible mechanism to ensure full respect for human rights in Western Sahara, the UN Secretary General should give prominence in his report to the UN Security Council to the violation of international law, international humanitarian law, and human rights in this non-self-governing territory. They called on the UN General Assembly to assume its legal and political responsibilities to speed up the decolonization of Western Sahara in accordance with its resolutions 1514, 1956, 2029, and 3437. The international and Sahrawi NGOs also insisted that the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights should immediately send an observer mission to Western Sahara. They urged the UN Human Rights Council to pay particular attention to violations of human rights, in particular the right to self-determination resulting from foreign military intervention, aggression, or occupation, and consider the creation of a mandate for a special rapporteur on the situation in occupied Western Sahara. They also called on the African Union and its member states to respect and implement the objectives and principles enshrined in the Constitutive Act with regard to the illegal military occupation of the Sahrawi Republic.
You are still listening to Radio Algeria International. On Monday, the public channel France 2 broadcast in its news edition a report entitled "When Algiers Wants to Silence Its Opponents." The details on this with Amina Bourisha.
The Algerian news agency said that the report, which was intended to be an investigation into alleged Algerian interference in France, was in fact akin to a communication operation serving a very specific political agenda. It added that what was broadcast by France 2 is simply scandalous, adding that French public media has always claimed not waging low media campaigns against Algeria. Unlike the media controlled by Vincent Bolloré, the mouthpiece of the most extremist of the French right. The report L'Œil du 20 accuses Algeria of operating directly on French soil to silence its opponent based on testimonies from figures of the MAC terrorist movement and former marginalized activists. The Algerian news agency said France 2 suggested that the Algerian authorities are trying to win over these opponents by carrying out influential actions. with the Algerian diaspora, which continues to prove its attachment and love for its country. Algeria, through the voice of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, has never hidden its wish to see all its children, wherever they are, contribute to the development of the country. The initiative of Lim Shem, launched in 2022 to face the challenges besting the country, reflects the President's will for dialogue and national unity. Recent history is full of examples of French maneuvers aimed at destabilizing Algeria, such as the recruitment of former terrorists to lead propaganda campaigns against the Algerian state. Algeria categorically rejects these unfounded accusations and will not remain silent in the face of these maneuvers.
You're still listening to Radio Algeria International. Next is our special program for the holy fasting month of Ramadan.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of Inspiring Figures. During the holy month of Ramadan, we invite you to join our special programs on prominent figures who marked the Islamic Golden Age, a period of cultural, economic, and scientific flourishing in the history of Islam, traditionally dated from the 8th to the 14th century. Shed light on a prominent historian who is regarded to be one of the brightest and most brilliant minds of the Muslim world. He contributed to many fields. Many scientists today believe that social sciences as we know it today might have never reached such high level without the help of Ibn Khaldun. He is regarded to be among the founding fathers of modern sociology, the philosophy of history, and economics. Ibn Khaldun's best work is the widely known book, the Muqaddimah, meaning the introduction, which he wrote in 1377. It was an introduction and first book to his planned work of universal history, but already in his lifetime it was viewed as an independent work on its own. Some modern thinkers think of it as the first work dealing with the philosophy of history, social sciences of sociology, demography, cultural history, and many more sciences. Ibn Khaldun starts the Muqaddimah with thorough criticism on the mistakes regularly committed by his fellow historians and the difficulties which await the historian in his work. He sums up 7 critical issues and then lays out his theory of human society in the Muqaddimah. Ibn Khaldun often criticized the uncritical acceptance of historical data. As a result, he introduced the scientific method to the social sciences, which was considered something new to his age. He often referred to it as his new science and developed his own new terminology for it. His historical method also laid the groundwork for the observation of the role of state, communication, propaganda, and systematic bias in history, leading to his development of historiography. The concept of asabiya, meaning tribalism, clanism, or in a modern context, nationalism, is one of the best known aspects of the Muqaddimah. Ibn Khaldun uses the term asabiya to describe the bond of cohesion among humans in a group forming community. The bond Asabiya exists at any level of civilization, from nomadic society to states and empires. Asabiya is most strong in the nomadic phase and decreases as civilization advances. And as this Asabiya declines, another more compelling Asabiya may take its place. Thus, civilizations rise and fall, and history describes these cycles of Asabiya as they play out. Ibn Khaldun wrote his famous book Al-Muqaddimah in a cave near Ferenda in Tihirt, known now as Tiaret in western Algeria, at a height of more than 1,000 meters. It is said that Ibn Khaldun took refuge in the cave to have the calm and serenity necessary to write his famous multidisciplinary book. Later, several distinguished 16th and 17th century Ottoman scholars and statesmen took a keen interest in Ibn Khaldun's work, and a partial translation of the Muqaddimah into Turkish was made in the 18th century. But it was only after the 1860s, when a complete French translation of the Muqaddimah appeared, that Ibn Khaldun found the worldwide audience his incomparable genius deserved. Well, with this, we come to the end of our program, Inspiring Figures. That's it for me. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome to our program, Islam Through Places and Ages. Today, our broadcast will be devoted to Islam in China. The Great Mosque of Guangzhou is also known as Haixing Mosque, which means Remember the Sage, a memorial mosque to the Prophet, and is also popularly called the Guangcha Mosque, which translates as the Beacon Tower Mosque. Haixing Mosque is located on Guangcha Road, a light pagoda road which runs eastward off Remnin Zonglu. Prior to 500 CE and hence before the establishment of Islam, Arab seafarers had established trade relations with the Middle Kingdom, China. Arab ships bravely set off from Basra, the tip of the Arabian Gulf, and also from the town of Qais, Siraf in the Persian Gulf. They sailed the Indian Ocean, passing Sandurip, Sri Lanka, and navigated away through the Strait of Malacca, which were between the Sumatra and Malaysian peninsulas en route to the South China Sea. They established trading posts on the southeastern coastal ports of Guangzhou and Guangzhou. Some Arabs had already settled in China and probably embraced Islam when the first Muslim deputation arrived, as their families and friends back in Arabia had already embraced Islam during the Prophet's revelation. Guangzhou is called Khanfu by the Arabs, who later set up a Muslim quarter which became a center of commerce. Guangzhou's superior geographical position made it play an important role as the oldest trading and international port city in China. Witnessing a series of historical events, China has become a significant place in history and one of the fastest growing regions in the world, enjoying unprecedented prosperity. Whilst an Islamic state was founded by Holy Prophet Muhammad, may the mercy and blessings of God Almighty be upon him, China was enduring a period of unification and defense. Early Chinese annals mention Muslim Arabs and called their kingdom Al-Medina of Arabia. Islam in Chinese is called Yisilan Jiao, meaning pure religion. A Chinese official once described Mecca as being birthplace of Buddha Mahiyawu, that is, Prophet Muhammad. There are several historical versions relating to the advent of Islam in China. Some records claim Muslims first arrived in China into groups within as many months from Abyssinia in Ethiopia. Ethiopia was a land where some early Muslims first fled in fear from the persecution of the Quraysh tribe in Mecca. Among that group of refugees were one of Prophet Muhammad's daughters, Ruqayya, her husband Uthman ibn Affan, Sa'd ibn Waqqas, and many other prominent companions who migrated on the advice of the Prophet. They were successfully granted political asylum by the Abyssinian king Asmahanigus in the city of Aksum. However, some companions never returned to Arabia. They may have traveled on in the hope of earning their livelihood elsewhere and may have eventually reached China by land or sea during the Siwi dynasty. Some records relate that Sa'd ibn Waqqas and 3 other companions sailed to China from Abyssinia, Ethiopia, with the backing of the king of Abyssinia. Sa'd then returned to Arabia, bringing a copy of the Holy Quran back to Guangzhou some 21 years later, which approximately coincides with the account of Liu Qi, who wrote the life of the Holy Prophet. One of the companions who lived in China is believed to have died in 1635 CE and was buried in the western urban part of Hami. His tomb is known as Gais Mazars and revered by many in the surrounding region. It is in the northwestern autonomous province of Xinjiang, Xinjiang, and about 400 miles east of the list capital, Urumqi. Xinjiang is 4 times the size of Japan, shares its international border with 8 different nations, and is home to the largest indigenous group of Turkic-speaking Uyghurs. Hence, as well as being the largest Islamized area of China, Xinjiang is also of strategic importance geographically. The Holy Quran states in unequivocal words that Muhammad was sent only as a mercy from God Almighty to all peoples, and in another verse, "We have not sent thee but as a mercy to all mankind." This universality of Islam facilitated its acceptance by people from all races and nations, and is amply demonstrated in China, where the indigenous population of ethnic varieties of Chinese Muslims today is greater than the population of many Arab countries, including that of Saudi Arabia. The history of Hwansung Mosque represents centuries of Islamic culture, dating right back to the mid-7th century during the Tang Dynasty, the golden age of Chinese history. It was in this period, 18 years after the death of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, that Islam, the last of the 3 monotheistic religions, was first introduced to China by the 3rd Caliph Uthman ibn Affan. Uthman ibn Affan was one of the first to embrace Islam and memorize the Holy Quran. He possessed a mild and gentle nature, and he married Ruqayya, and following her death, Kulthum, both were daughters of the Holy Prophet. Consequently, he was given the epithet of Dun-Nurayn, the one with the 2 lights. Uthman was highly praised for safeguarding the manuscripts of the Holy Quran against disputes by ordering its compilation from the memories of the companions and sending copies to the 4 corners of the Islamic Empire. Uthman sent a delegation to China, led by Sa'd ibn Waqqas, who was a much-loved maternal uncle of the Prophet and one of the most famous companions who converted to Islam at the age of just 17. He was a veteran of all the battles, and one of the 10 who is reported that the Holy Prophet said were assured a place in paradise. In Medina, Sa'd, using his ability in architecture, added Aniwan, an art hall used by a Persian emperor, as a worship area. He later laid a foundation of what was to be the first mosque in China, where early Islamic architecture forged a relationship with Chinese architecture. According to the ancient historical records of the Tang Dynasty, an emissary from the kingdom of Al-Madinah, led by Sa'd ibn Waqqas and his deputation of companions, who sailed on a special envoy to China in 650 CE, via the Indian Ocean of the China Sea, to the famous port of Guangzhou, then traveled overland to Zhangjiang, present-day Xi'an, via what was later known as the Silk Route. Do join us next time for the second and last part of Islam through places and ages, devoted to the Asian continent and particularly to China.
Sintonizan Radio Argelia Internacional. El diario hablado.
Señoras, señores, bienvenidos al canal Radio Argelia Internacional. Durante la cumbre árabe dedicada a Palestina, el jefe de la diplomacia argelina Ahmed Attaf llama a movilizarse alrededor del pueblo